Hey, it's Yassine here, and for today's episode, we'll be getting into the heart of the field service industry, the actual field operation. And as you know, technicians are like doctors for your equipment. You go to a doctor to either get checked when you're feeling unwell or for an annual preventive checkup. And in the same way, you call a technician when you've got problems with your equipment, or as with all good service companies, you get it checked for planned maintenance. But what happens during this stage can make or break your business reputation. After all, you wouldn't usually go to a doctor who gave you a wrong diagnosis or worse, couldn't solve your problem. So if you can't deliver on the promises you've made, it's really hard to get your customers to trust you again. To do that, I'm excited to bring on my buddy, Roy Dockery, VP of Field Operations at 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗔𝗠𝗣𝗦, and our advisor at Orgo for all things field services. Roy, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, Yassine, thanks for having me. Thanks to the Field Service Excellence audience and the support team that's behind the scenes making it all happen. But no, glad to be here.
Man, I've been really looking forward to this. You're one of my favorite people in the world. You've got an expansive knowledge. There's almost nothing I ask you about or I come to you with and you don't have an answer for it. So I really value your knowledge, your expertise, and I'm always I always look forward to our conversations. So before we get started, why don't you give us a brief background on who you are and what you do for those who are meeting you for the first time?
Yeah, so he said Roy Dockery, and the VP of Field Operations at 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗔𝗠𝗣𝗦. So in my current role, I oversee field service, technical support, training and development, scheduling, dispatching, logistics, reverse logistics, assembly, and shipping and receiving. So
you're not busy
at a startup,
at all.
so yeah, not busy at all. At work, prior to that, I spent 12 years in healthcare automation technology with a focus in medication management, pharmacy automation, and automated material transport. So kind of covering the same basis. Really, when it comes to the post-sales support for the customer. One difference, my previous company, we did do customer-facing support as well as internal technical support. So yeah, and then outside of that, as Yassine knows, I have a podcast, I mentor people, I do consulting, and a lot of my focus is just on leadership development and mentoring leaders. So kind of as a leader of leaders is what I tend to lean into.
And I love that. And that's how really our journey together started. You had a mentorship program that I joined, and I found about you on YouTube, and I watched a few videos, and then one thing led to another, and I joined your program, and then our relationship started there. Then I started coming to you for advice on how we can evolve our capability in field operations and remote support. You were one of the first in our industry to actually promote remote first service. And this concept that, hey, the future is in supporting first our customers remotely, right? The age of where you have to go to the actual site to perform maintenance or diagnosis is of the past, and you were the pioneers of that movement. And on the topic of leadership, I would love to make a special announcement. Roy is coming out with his book, The Art of Leading. And I wanted to highlight this because Roy, again, is one of the few leaders who not just talk the talk, but he walks the walk. And as we all know, the growth rate of our companies are in direct proportion to the quality and number of leaders we develop in our organizations. And if there is one thing that propels a company's growth, it's developing leadership. And I want to highlight Roy's book, The Art of Leading, because it's not theory. It's not motivational talk. It's actual practical advice in the trenches on how to, as a leader, on how to develop other leaders, on how to lead with empathy, with love, and not, how to seek debates and conflict as a door to resolution or as a window into resolution. It's a really a unique take on leadership that I have yet to read about from any other authors. So Roy, can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I consider myself a working intellectual, right? You read a lot of leadership books by people who, been consulting for 15 years, or they're academic, and like there aren't a lot of people who write leadership books that are actually leading large organizations. So with that, I was like, well, while I'm still in the thick of it, like, let me document some of the stuff that I'm doing to develop the leaders as well as the people that I mentor who are leading large organizations. And that kind of originally spilled into like a kind of a master class that I did on YouTube. And then I'm kind of going deeper in that with like principles and framework and an understanding in the book as well. And really just kind of dividing it into like who we are as leaders and then how we lead, right? So it's like the being and the doing, and kind of looking at it from those two different perspectives. Because a lot of leadership books don't talk about having to fire employees.
Right.
And we have to do it sometimes. Like, it's difficult, but there's a way to do it where, there's a way to do it where you can set somebody up for future success, and you don't wind up setting somebody's career on fire. And there's also a way to leave an organization, right? There's times where you probably need to step away as a leader because you become the upper limit to the rest of the people in your organization, right? So if you don't step away, the people you've been developing don't have space to grow. And so those are some of the things I didn't really see addressed. So I said, hey, like, I'm in the middle of it, so why not talk about it? But it's with the publishers now, so hopefully my ideas will be the same by the time it comes back from editing. But yeah, in the meantime, people can watch the Leadership Lab on my YouTube channel on the Savage Truth Network, and then I look forward to the book coming out. Your Sid knows I'm always marketing, so it's on the shirt, The Art of Leading. You might, if you see it at the airport, it's definitely me.
Well, speaking of the shirt, so we have a special announcement where I'll be sponsoring, giving away 5 books, all expenses covered, plus some merch, The Art of Leading merch. So if you're into leadership development, or you're interested in becoming a better leader, make sure to stay tuned when the book comes out, because I'll be giving out 5 copies of Roy's book along with some merch. So make sure to leave a comment below to enter the raffle. And Roy, let's dive right into today's topic, field operations. So can you help us define field operations and walk us through a day in the life of a technician?
Yeah, so technician, just depending on the overall organization, right? And but largely a technician is getting a work order, right? So whether they get the work orders for the entire day, the entire week, or some organizations feed technicians work orders one at a time, basically that first work order of the day, they're gonna look at the scope of work, understand what they need from the customer. And then once they've identified that, they know where they're going, they know what their point of contact is, they kind of know that they're kind of thinking through a plan of action for that first call. That's when you hit to what most of us call the truck roll, right? Yeah. And the truck roll is literally, they get out the house, they leave the office, they get in the truck, and they're heading. But on that truck roll, right, you've got a couple things where they've got inventory. Typically, we refer to it as truck stock or van stock, depending on what system you're using or the language. But then they need to have accurate inventory, because more likely than not, when they get there to resolve the problem, they're going to need some parts, tools, or materials to resolve the issue. So once they're in the truck, they're en route. They're kind of updating work orders and systems that communicate with the customer along the way. And so that's kind of like your pre-site activity, that communication, the inventory, and then safely getting there. I know a lot of us have telemetrics on our vehicles for speeding and wearing seat belts and hard stops and all of that stuff as well. And then they get on site, right? So they get on site, they have some description or brief summary of what the problem is, and then they've got to dive into it, right? Yeah. So they've got to dive into troubleshooting, diagnosing, and then attempting to resolve that problem as often as possible on that first trip. So hopefully they can, they've got the competence and the tools and the support that they need to resolve it on the first trip. And then once they're done with that trip, they've kind of got like that post-trip activity, right? That's reconciling their inventory, making sure they're capturing all the details associated, entering how much time they spent, what materials they use, how far they traveled, And that's all the stuff you need to make sure that you've got a correct invoice, right? When it comes to billing the customer for that support. And that's some of that activity. Sometimes they've got a transactional survey. How did I do today?
Yeah,
did you appreciate my service? And then hopefully that's resolved, right? If there is another trip required because you didn't have the parts, or maybe there's a callback afterwards, they kind of repeat that similar process and going in. But ultimately the goal is to get there safely, have the material in hand, resolve the problem for the customer on that first trip. Maybe not the first try, maybe they got to try a few things while they're on site. But ultimately, before you leave, you want that customer in a better situation
than you found
than what they were, right? And they're interacting with a number of systems, right? Their work order systems, probably some communication with the back office, documentation, manuals, and all of those things as well that they're using.
Yeah, and I love how you broke up the, let's call it the technician journey, into pre-site activity, on-site activity, and post-site activity. So as a VP of field operation, right, your focus is always on innovation, continuous improvement. How can we do better? Even though I know you guys at Flux Safety are flushed with cash, raising, God bless you, rounds and rounds of funding, right? I mean, because you're hot, right? You're one of the hottest startups on the scenes in field service. And, you're doing some amazing work. But even when you're flushed with cash, your investors require always efficiency, right? Especially in today's economy where money is really expensive, having cash in the bank is not an excuse to do a bad job. So obviously, your focus, Roy, as a VP is always on what can we do better? How can we do more with less? And you're focused on numbers, KPIs. So what KPIs, as a field service leader, as a service leader, what KPIs are you looking at, during pre-site, on-site, post-site activity to kind of optimize the performance of your team? Can you just break it down and maybe rattle off the top 3 KPIs? I know there's a ton, but what are the most important 3 KPIs at each stage of the technician journey? And maybe some benchmarks too, if you can share.
Absolutely. So I would say from a pre-site activity perspective, one key thing you're looking at is response time.
Right.
So what is your response time and how does that align to your SLA? Now, a lot of companies have externally facing SLAs and you have internal SLAs. So you might have a, 24-hour response time for the customer, but you want somebody to be there within 4. So
can you define response time? Is it response time like the time to pick up the phone or until you're on site?
Yeah, so from a field service perspective, since we're kind of specifically focusing on the truck roll, this is the on-site response time to the customer.
Okay, makes
from
sense.
an SLA perspective. And you want an SLA adherence greater than 90%, right? You don't want to set an expectation and then plan not to hit it. So 9 times out of 10, you want to be delivering on your internal or external SLA, right? Either way, even if it's not something committed to on paper, a lot of times organizations will have their own internal metrics that they want to drive an SLA on.
And that's for, maintenance jobs, that would be probably same day response time, and for installations it could vary. How do you think about response time for different types of jobs?
Yeah, and that's what it is, right? You've got the SLA by job type. So if you have, and sometimes it's even by job type by priority. So you might have a critical system down that you want to respond to within 4 hours, where you might have a medium or low priority maintenance item that you would commit to responding to the next business day, right? So a lot of times it's based on work order type as well as the priority of that particular call. And then sometimes it's also the customer layered on top of that, because you may have a customer that's just paying for premium support.
Right.
So regardless of what the work order type is, they have a commitment that they get 24-hour response on any of their issues tied to particular equipment. And so we had that a lot in healthcare. We deal with it some now as well, just dealing with law enforcement. So basically that SLA can be work order specific, it could be priority specific, as well as customer specific.
Love it.
For those customers that pay for like a premium service offering or like a white glove experience.
Makes sense. So that response time is one. What other metrics are you looking at in the
So
pre-site
another
activity?
element that you want to look at is like inventory accuracy, right?
Okay.
So from that perspective, like to roll a truck and resolve a problem, you're normally dispatching technicians based on their available inventory. But if their inventory is inaccurate, you can actually dispatch somebody to a service call and waste the truck roll because they can't resolve it. And inventory accuracy needs to be 100%, right? Like it's one of those things that somebody may miss a scan, they may miss
You definitely don't have any low standards right there. 100% inventory accuracy. And let's be honest here. Does that happen often?
It doesn't happen often, right? I mean, you have people that are really good at following the process, but also setting the expectation at 100% allows you to find system issues.
Okay.
Because if we give technicians effective processes for tracking their inventory, it should be easy for them to maintain 100%. The reason a lot of our processes are difficult, and so it's hard for the techs to jump through all the hoops to get to 100%. But then what we got to do as leaders is start removing those obstacles and make the process simpler,
and is
right?
it the technician's accountability for inventory accuracy, or is it like more cross-functional?
I would say it's cross-functional. It's organizational, right? Like we need to know where our inventory is. And so if there's a gap,
But who owns it?
then we have to hold people accountable where the gap is being created. If the gap is in the system, we've got to get the system fixed. And sometimes the gap is the technician, right? They don't update their work orders. They don't expense their parts. They don't record when things get delivered.
Right.
And so it's a constant like drive to kind of encourage the correct behavior.
So in your organization, is the technician accountable for accuracy or responsible? They're responsible for updating the information. Hey, here's the parts that I use, but those who are accountable is actually more inventory or procurement or some other department, or is it your technician who's ultimately like, the buck stops at the technician?
Our technician is accountable for so the technician is accountable for accurately recording what they have.
Yeah.
Right. I can't hold the technician accountable for what he's supposed to have if it never got delivered.
Got it. Yep.
Right. So it's whatever's physically in their van, whatever's physically in their storage location or at their customer site. They're accountable for that.
To maintain
but
records.
Then you have, like a master planner or somebody in supply chain who's ultimately accountable for the overall inventory of what's leaving the warehouse and what's being delivered.
Making sure the right part is at the right truck at the right time in the right quantity.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's two parts of accountability. So the technician is really accountable for recording what they physically have. Exactly. But they're not held accountable to the entire vertical supply chain process.
The availability.
Yeah, because if they didn't get it,
why you're
or they
saying
received
inventory
the wrong
accuracy.
Part, yeah, exactly. So theirs is inventory count accuracy.
Yeah, availability, right? So the inventory availability versus inventory accuracy. So thank you for that nuance. Really important.
Yeah, and supply chain would be more accountable for right part, right place, right time.
Yeah.
Right. So like that, what left the warehouse is what was actually intended to be shipped. And it was delivered, and it arrived where it was supposed to arrive.
Makes sense. And what is a third key metric you look at pre-site? So response time, inventory accuracy, and
I would say a big one, especially now, is driver safety. As far as like that route, we talked about like while the technician's on the way there, I can't say how many years that I've had conversations with finance departments about insurance and workers' compensation related to motor vehicle accidents and damage. Tracking that driver safety, because especially if you have branded vehicles, that's your company reputation out in the public. But it's also just to keep the technician safe. So the driver safety is normally driven by the scorecard that you build and whatever telemetry system you use. So that has to do with how often are they speeding? Are they braking harshly? How often do they make quick turns? Are they wearing their seatbelt? How long is the car idling? And all things like that. So you want, from a driver safety score perspective, you want them to be like 80 to 90% in compliance.
Right.
Understanding that sometimes you got to speed up to get around the truck or to get to a safer location. But you want to look for people who are habitually kind of flagging the system that they're not driving in the safest manner, and potentially putting themselves or other people at risk.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we can do a whole episode around safety and how you track it, and most importantly, how you get people to be compliant with it. So no, important, and I love that you have focus and you rank it in your top 3 KPIs preset. So let's now move from pre-site activity to on-site activity. What are the top 3 metrics that you look at for on-site performance?
Yeah, so I would I'll rattle them off and then we can go into each one.
Yep.
I would say first time fix rate,
Okay.
the time to resolution, and customer satisfaction.
All right.
Right, like when you're physically on site. So with the first time fix rate, like if it's part availability, all of that stuff, bearing that's available, we get there, the problem should be resolved before we leave.
Yeah.
Right. So like we should know ahead of time based on based on the call that came in, information that was gathered, what we need to resolve that problem, and we should have the competency to troubleshoot it and resolve it on that first visit as much as possible.
And what would be a
I know
benchmark?
that varies by industry,
Yeah.
but like for working in healthcare, like downtime was not an option. Working with public safety now, downtime is not an option. I expect greater than 90% first time fix rate.
Okay.
Right? Like
Makes
if
sense.
we're not fixing it right the first time, it's almost like there's a part missing, we've got a supply chain shortage, right? Or there's some circumstance that that's unusual, but like my expectation is that on the first call,
You're
the
fixing
problem's
it.
being resolved to the customer satisfaction.
And do you diagnose? Do you diagnose and try to fix on the same visit? That's your goal.
Yeah, that's our goal. And I mean, like I said, depending on the business model in both industries that I've worked in, right, there was a remote support aspect of it. So more likely than not, there was some remote technical support provided or attempted that already kind of did some of the diagnostics. So you're not really going in blind, right? Because I've been in B2B this whole time. Like if you're doing B2C, somebody may not know, right? When you're talking about like, food service or where you may not have technical people on the other side, that first time fix rate may be lower. But in my experience, we're normally dealing with technical people trying to help them resolve a problem. They help us troubleshoot. And if they can't resolve the problem, we have to come and kind of do that level 2 troubleshooting. But there's already been enough like on-site diagnostic and information provided that we can normally narrow it down to the critical component or a few parts and be able to come on site with those to resolve the issue.
I think remote diagnostic and support is another key topic. Roy, maybe we can tackle on another episode and we can do a deep dive. Technical support is key. So, all right, awesome.
Yeah.
First time fix rate. So talk to me about time to resolution and how do you define resolution? I know there's variation there, time to diagnosis or time to resolution. How do you define that?
Yeah, and in time to resolution, and a lot of it just depends on your work order system, right? Because a lot of times we count from the time a work order was open to the time that it was closed. A lot of times we'll count that as resolution, but a work order may be closed, saying that like I have to come back with another part. So that's really like diagnosis versus resolution,
right? Because
the customer's problem isn't resolved, even though that work order was closed. And the original call could have been to diagnose, to your point earlier, and not repair. But basically that time to resolution is like, how much time are we spending on site getting to like a finite answer, right? Whether that answer is the problem is solved or whether that answer is you need to order this fuse, this part, and we're done. But how long are we spending on time? How much time are we spending on site in front of the customer, kind of trying to figure things out, right? Because what you want is the problem to be resolved, and you want it to be resolved as quickly as possible. But the reason you want to look at first time fix rate and time to resolution, because you can have a technician who's in and out quickly, but then they have a horrible first time fix rate.
Right.
So and those are the people, you've got some techs that are just part swap heavy, right? Like, oh, I know what it is. Let me replace this board. And then they leave, and an hour and a half later, the same problem comes back or another error presents itself. So those two kind of balance each other out, that you want somebody that's taking care of the customer's problem, but you don't necessarily want somebody that's rushing through it and not potentially getting to the root cause and getting the customer back up and running. So, right, like that's why the balance of the three, and then going into the third one, is that customer satisfaction. Because even the experience for the customer when it comes to behavior, communication,
that's a big one.
And all of that other stuff, we all know sometimes you have great technicians who have horrible bedside manner. Right? So they're really good.
A lot of the reviews online, a lot of the Google reviews, a lot of it, rude behavior, unprofessional, bad customer service, right? A lot of those soft skills are missing for a lot of technicians, even though they're great technicians.
And even in my history of managing hundreds and hundreds of technicians, right? Like more often than not, like we didn't have to separate technicians for technical competence. It was often behavior, right? It was the way that they interacted with customers, the way that they interacted with internal partners, coworkers, colleagues, and things of that nature. So like that CSAT part is important because from a culture perspective in the field, like you want a certain expectation for how your brand and your company is represented in the field. And a lot of that comes through CSAT, right? Because you might have somebody that fixed it the first time, he was in and out in an hour, and then to your point, you get a Google review that he was rude, he yelled at my dog, whatever else happened, and you're like, oh man, like, so I think it kind of helps balance that out. And that's why transactional surveys in field service are important. Like you may not always get an answer, but at least if you're offering it, you give a customer a voice to kind of help you balance out that evaluation of that on-site experience.
And sometimes no response is a good response, right? Because if a customer is angry, I can guarantee you they're going to respond to that survey. And what kind of benchmark are you looking at for CSAT?
For CSAT, for me, it's, and I think we did the math, right? Like I always expect the CSAT score to be over a 4.7 out of 5. So you're looking at like 94 to 95%.
Right.
Kind of satisfactory ratings.
Right. So
from customers. And of course, we always look at the outliers, right? If I have a technician who got 300 4.8s and then all of a sudden they get a 1, it's not like that technician's going to get fired. Like we're going to look at that situation because all customers aren't, I'm not a believer that the customer's always right.
Exactly.
Sometimes the customer's a jerk and needs to be fired. So that's the balance there. But you look at it overall and you take all of the feedback seriously and follow up on all of it to make sure that your team's being represented well in the field.
I love that. Awesome. So now let's move to the last stage of the technician journey, which is post-site activity. What are some of the metrics you look at there, Roy?
Yeah, and I mean, there are two of them primary. We mentioned one already, which is kind of like that callback rate, right? Like we left, the job was done, the job was closed, but did we get called back for the same problem or a related problem, right? And so that's almost like warranty. Of course, we don't want to go roll the truck and not make any money off of that call.
Right.
So you want to minimize that. Some of it may be, equipment issues, manufacturer problems or things of that nature. But I always expect that to be less than like 10 to 15%, right? That we're going back to a call after we've claimed it was fixed the first time. And then the other thing is just the work order quality. And as far as the information being provided by the technician, I know you all talked about the order to cash cycle. If we don't pay attention to work order quality on a regular basis, we only find out we've got a quality issue when the customer refuses to pay the invoice.
Define that a little bit for me, work order quality.
Yeah, so it's the quality of what information did the technician provide about the work that was done.
Okay.
Did they actually capture the correct part? Right, the right inventory? Is there enough detail? Are the hours correct? Is the mileage correct? So if a customer ever reaches out and says, hey, you charged me for 6 hours, but your technician was only here for 2, and he left. Or, I'm showing, that your technician claimed he replaced all his stuff, but when he was here, he told me he did X, and, here's the box that he left for the part that he did. So it's really like, how much detail are they providing? And ultimately it comes down to, does the information the tech provided on the work order help justify the invoice? right? So like, that's how I look at the quality. And in the past, what we've done is, and I think we've talked about this briefly, but like, we'll just do an audit, right? So you'll just audit 2 or 3 of a technician's work orders a month. And you can look at the GPS tag on their vehicle that shows they arrived at a site at 4 o'clock. They left that site at 6 o'clock. You look at the work order, they said they were there for 2 hours, right? You look at their inventory, you look at their work order, they said they replaced a part. But then when you look at the work order line items, you don't see a part being expensed, right? So like, you just do that kind of audit. And more often than not, we found that like, when people aren't doing it properly, they're always consistently not doing it properly. So when you audit, you find that behavior. And then what winds up happening is that the level, like every time we find an error like that, the frequency of auditing goes up, right? So, you know, you might only have 3 or 4 work orders a month, but if a customer reports that, you know, that you basically were off on your work order and we find out they were correct,
then you go back.
Then we're checking 3 or 4 of your work orders a week.
Wow.
Right. So like, and you kind of ramp up the auditing, and you know, and then that's basically how you settling in. But it's really about that reconciliation. Like, what are we billing for, and did our technician record enough information to justify that invoice?
And to your point, you know, these are some of the 2 key metrics that you want to look at post-site activity. But also, if you make money off of, and it depends on your business model. Maybe at Flock Safety, this is not something that that's as important of a metric. But if you're a service company, you probably also want to look at your cost of service, right? Yeah. There's a few things there. Cost of service, you know, how much does it cost you? Because what you might find out is some technicians, their cost to service certain equipment is much higher than other technicians. And that's because due to lack of training, or, you know, multiple truck rolls or what have you. The other one is also productive hours, right? How much of their hours is spent on revenue generating activities versus non-revenue generating activities? And this is key, because you're selling hours at the end of the day as a service company, or you're you're monetizing time. And the better you monetize that time, the more money you make. So this is really fantastic. Again, the world of data and KPIs, right? It's probably if I talk to another service leader, they have a whole set of KPIs. But I think what you went over, Roy, I would say there's right? These are constants. Well, regardless of the industry, you can carry over these metrics. And to a large extent, you'll find that if there is a problem, you'll probably pick it up in one or more of these metrics. So now that we've defined these KPIs, let's talk about some of the top 3 to 5 breakdowns that you typically see and pick up on when you're looking at these KPIs.
Yeah, so I think the first one, and like you said, I'm trying to use examples that relate kind of across industries, but I mean, I guess I would describe it as like just general customer frustration or misaligned expectations, right? And that kind of ties to the first one we talked about on-site response time and SLA, right? Because there are customers who have an expectation, right? They're told by a salesperson or maybe a phone agent that we'll be there as soon as possible,
right?
But nobody defines soon. So the technician shows up on, you know, that call came in on Friday. The technician shows up on Monday, and there's a pissed off customer who thought you were coming Friday night or Saturday morning, when the response time, the business response time is the next business day, right? Which happened to be Monday. So like, when we're not very clear on expectations throughout the entire organization, so that when we communicate in the language that we use, that we're not, one, overcommitting to things, and we understand what our SLA is. Like, I always found it interesting that like salespeople sold service contracts but didn't know what our standard response time was.
You know, and that's
right?
interesting.
Same thing across different parts of the organization. So like, having that alignment, like the broken expectation normally comes from another internal department,
right?
That just doesn't know the detail of the service experience, or or the details of the service level. So what I've found is that like you've got to evangelize that through the entire organization, whether it's project management, sales, customer support, billing, like whoever it is, that like, hey, if somebody asks you what our standard response is, you say this.
Right. So that's
that we're
the
not
resolution.
overcommitting.
So it's like an FAQ or like how do you resolve miscommunication or breakdown in communication, whether it's price, it's response time. Like literally yesterday, I was going over a report, the service experience report of with a service company executive, and we're just looking at some of the key drivers for negative customer reviews. And the one that kept coming up is breakdown in communication, especially around pricing. What the sales folks promised when they first set up the contract or the deal didn't translate when they, when the billing or the finance department sent out the invoice. So how do you typically resolve that? How do you fix it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's organizational culture, right? And accountability. Like everyone needs to be, and I had a salesman in my last company who always used to say, like, we all need to be singing from the same song sheet, right? So it's like you said, it's FAQs, but it starts there. Like you have to ask like, hey, what questions are you being asked? And then as a partner, let me get you the service questions for sales. So like, so I've done service training for the sales department. I've done service training for the finance department and service training for solutions consultants and all of that other stuff. And it's just getting to a level of commonality as an organization where we all understand the same thing. And when somebody doesn't know, we get out of the habit of just answering a question when you don't know what you're talking about, right? So one of my favorite quotes is from Confucius, and he said, a wise man is one who says he knows not.
Right.
Like if you don't know, just say you don't know and then ping your business partner instead of like making it up, right? Because a lot of people I think are just trying to give their best answer, but then it could be outdated. It could be being applied to the wrong product, the wrong geography, right? Like I'll use it like I can give you a next day service level in Atlanta right now. I cannot give you a next day service level in Des Moines, Iowa. Right? So like just because because a salesperson was like, oh, I heard Roy said he can do a next day, service level, but you forgot that I said Atlanta or California or Houston. I didn't say everywhere in the country. But a lot of it is culture, communication, and then training.
Documentation. Yeah,
and documentation. Yeah, like giving them, I always tell people, I never hold somebody accountable to something that's not in writing.
Yep.
So if I haven't told the sales team what to communicate, I can't get mad when they make up the details.
Makes sense.
Right? So like, I give it to them, and then we hold people accountable when it gets to us that people are giving different answers than what we all agreed upon.
Makes sense. And this breakdown in communication, you said it shows up in CSAT and in response time.
Yeah.
That's
and in that SLA adherence, right? Because we may be, and you talk about cost of a work order, right? Like we may be spending more money trying to hit an SLA that we're not even obligated to hit because of what was committed to, or we might miss it because we don't know.
Makes sense.
So like having that clarity and also making sure that the technician is aware of it helps, right? So we've got to clarify that contract language, make sure that everybody's aligned on response times, and so that, because ultimately what you want to do as an organization, right, is you want to under promise and over deliver.
Absolutely.
Right. So like that's the position you want to be in, and that just requires some of that alignment.
All right. So breakdown number 2.
Breakdown number 2 is just poor first time fix rate.
Okay.
And depending on industry, I think more often than not, the reason we can't fix it the first time we're there is because we don't have the right part. Right? So whether we don't have the right part because we've got an outdated manual, and so the part that we ordered actually isn't the one that matches, right? We got incomplete information from the customer, so we didn't have the proper model number, so then we brought something that doesn't fit. Or to the other problem we talked about, there's just a lack of accuracy in our inventory reporting. I thought I had 3 widgets in 2 boards, and then I really don't. So throughout the course of my day, I wound up running out of critical components and I'm on site, I know what the problem is, but then I can't resolve it because and a lot of that goes into the analysis that you're doing as an organization to determine what parts you should have kind of at that last mile, like what should be in a truck, what should be in a regional depot, and what should be in a warehouse. But like with that first time fix rate, like a lot of times companies will take like a cheaper approach and be like, oh, let's keep the low cost parts like with the technician. Let's do more centralized warehousing, and then we'll overnight things, or we'll ship things to the technicians. And I've always found like the more things that you can put in consignment, like at a customer location, the more things that you can put like within a region, like in a geography, and allow technicians to keep in their vehicles, the better you drive that first time fix rate. Because other than that, there aren't too many things you encounter, especially when you're dealing with hardware, electromechanical equipment, that you can't resolve with parts. So like a lot of companies though are trying to minimize the amount of assets they have, right? They want to lower that risk, but you wind up having a poor customer experience. You wind up with multiple truck rolls because you're trying to save on inventory, or you just have poor inventory visibility because you haven't implemented a system that gives you accurate, like real-time visibility of what your inventory is in the field and in your various inventory locations.
Makes sense. And when you see the first time fix rate is low, but you have the parts. Maybe I'm asking a very obvious question. What's the root cause of the breakdown typically?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got parts in a low first time fix rate, then like your competency and your training is likely the problem, right? Because if you've got the right parts, that means you're not diagnosing the issue the first time. And you'll see this a lot with new technicians, right? So and you can have this problem with new technology. So maybe you have the parts in the truck, but it's so new, people don't really know how to diagnose it. So when something's really, really new, or something's really, really old, like the knowledge that people have to make like a confident decision on how to repair it is probably not there, right? And so like all of this affects like service levels, obviously, because I want to get it up and running as quickly as possible. We talked about the cost of the service call. If I could have resolved it in one truck roll, but now it costs me 2 truck rolls, like that's a KPI. But then also just CSAT, right? And we already talked about first time fix rate. Like customers want you to leave their site and not come back.
Yeah, exactly. That problem, they want to see you often.
So, right. Because how do you want a customer to answer that? Like I was there, and then I call you afterwards, and how was the experience? And it's like, my machine's still down. Like 100%. That's a bad customer satisfaction experience if you were there and you're not able to walk out the door and get them back up and running.
100%. And when you're dealing with a lot of equipment, right? For instance, in a vertical, we specialize in commercial food equipment. You've got tens of thousands of SKUs there of equipment, literally. Like, do you typically, to resolve that, hey, you've got the part, but I don't know how to fix this equipment, do you typically provide technician support, on-site technician support to help resolve that as well?
Yeah, I mean, and for me, it was always, and it has always been kind of my motto to retire my technicians in tech support. So I like to retain like my most experienced technicians, field technicians, in the roles that actually provide the remote support for the technicians. For a couple reasons. One, they've done the job, they understand it, but also they've seen the really old equipment that the newer technicians are going to struggle with.
Yes.
And they normally can kind of fill some of those gaps that may not be in documents or in manuals. But I think it's absolutely critical to have not just somebody that can answer the phone, and you need people that can pull part numbers, order parts, do back office support, but you also need people who like understand the technical nature of what's being done in the field and kind of help walk people through it, especially with the amount of like retirements we have in field service, and with the amount of onboarding we're having to do with new technicians across all industries, right? Like this is in every vertical, every segment of field service. So like, instead of, when somebody has to have shoulder surgery, when somebody can no longer travel, when somebody has to be stationary, instead of laying them off, like it's an expensive resource, but I think it's worth every penny. And we just always would retain them in a technical support role.
Smart.
And we had an amazing, amazing, first time fix rate, even on the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
For
Remote resolution.
internal support and customer support as well.
That's fantastic. And so what other key breakdowns do you see? What's the third biggest or most recurring breakdown do you see in field operations? Just as I said, communication breakdown, poor first time fix rate. What else?
And I think we just touched on it a little bit. I'll actually say I think poor training is the third breakdown that I see a lot in field service, because and you mentioned a little bit, like, because of depending on your business, right? The number of SKUs that they have to support, the number of generations of equipment that they have to support. And it is really difficult to effectively equip a technician to be that well versed at that many things. When you don't give them some kind of tool or technology that allows them to do it, right? So where, you've got products that are close to end of life, you got products that are brand new, and things that aren't covered like in standard training. We all know that, like, we like to sell standard products, but there's always some customer who convinces us to do a one-off or an exception. And then because of the fact that we've got so many new technicians onboarding and the industry's been spoiled with seniority for so long, I also think we haven't invested a lot of time and effort in our training programs because we were just able to hire senior technicians from other organizations. So yeah, like as far as documentation, but it's like, they take longer. When you talk about time to resolution and diagnostics, it's poor employee satisfaction, right? Like the new technicians don't feel like they're doing well. They're tired of calling senior techs for support, and all of those things as well. And then we talked about it already. It drives up your cost per service call because you got to sit back. It takes them more time on site. And then obviously that's gonna have a negative impact on your customer satisfaction as well.
And how have you went about training technicians? If in a minute or so, if you want to just rattle off like the mode of training, or what's your go-to training delivery system or model?
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the methodologies for me was also segmenting the training and not trying to train everybody on everything at once. Right? So like we'll hire somebody and we want to get them up to speed on maintenance, troubleshooting, installations, and everything else at once. So like especially at Swisslog, what we started doing is we said, look, we'll bring in the technician and we're going to get them set on maintenance first. So they'll know how to do preventative maintenance. They'll understand theory of operation. And if you can do maintenance, if you understand the theory of operation, then it'll be easier for you to be able to troubleshoot because you know what it looks like and how it's supposed to run. Now you can troubleshoot. And once they can do maintenance and troubleshooting, like then I feel comfortable. I'll let you start up a new system because when that system's not working, you know what it's supposed to look like. And then you can build from there. So it went from, train you for 6 months on everything where you don't retain the majority of it, to like staggering the training and letting them walk through theory of operation, maintenance, troubleshooting, then installations, and then more complex work. Where after 2 weeks, I can have you independently doing maintenance and generating revenue.
Makes sense.
And then, and then you do that for 2, 3, or 4 weeks. Then when you step into an installation, you're actually extremely confident because you already know how to fix the system if it breaks. So you're more than willing to actually go do an installation. So when we went from almost like 6 months of training to 2 weeks of training, 3 to 4 weeks doing maintenance, and then another 2 to 3 weeks doing training, and then they're ready to go on install. So within 3 months, they're doing all revenue generating activity, and they're doing it with more confidence and not feeling like I would always hear feedback from technicians that were being onboarded that they felt like they were being thrown to the wolves. Right? Because you do all of this training, but it's like 2 days on this system, a week on this, a few days on this. And then it's like, okay, I know you remembered all of that. Now go do it. So I think segmenting really helped us. And then also it's just other technology as well, right? Like utilizing some of this generative AI technology that's out there.
Right.
That can search manuals for you. that can help walk you through intelligent diagnostics and things like that as well. And that's some of the stuff that we deployed at my previous company as well, just because we have more complex technology. So, you've got a Quant out there, you've got Neuron 7, you've got organizations like that can kind of digitize the brain of some of your senior technicians and put it in the hands of your junior techs, so that you don't expect them to retain all of that information. You want them to be confident and comfortable with the equipment, with your customers, with the overall workflows and processes that you support. But then you can stagger that training and then give them a tool that allows them to get a lot more work done in a quicker way.
I love it. And I know we're coming up on time here, but my last question here, around training, and how is that training typically delivered? Is it like classroom type, physical training, ride-alongs, online, using VR, we're seeing a lot of VR coming in. How do you deliver the actual training?
Yeah, so I've used all three. We haven't none of the companies I've been with, we've used augmented reality for support, but we haven't done anything with VR thus far. But we've got training modules. So you've got kind of your classroom training,
okay,
which is a lot of your theory, operation kind of book stuff. Then we also have classroom or like laboratory training, whether it's in like a demo lab or in one of our facilities where you can get hands-on experience, but in a controlled environment, right? So there's like book information, then there's hands-on training in a controlled environment, and then there's on-the-job training, which is hands-on training in a real-life environment that you cannot control.
Yep.
But then they have some support in somebody that can help them kind of build that confidence, right? Because for me, training for field service is when you're ready to go in field service when you're not afraid to break something.
Absolutely, man.
Right? Like, that's the confidence, right? So like when I feel like if I break it, I can figure it out. Like when they get over that level of fear, it's good. Some people get there too quickly, but either way, they still normally work.
Yeah, so different model of delivery can help you increase that retention, man. And I feel we can spend the next few hours talking about everything field operation, but I hope for you folks this has been helpful, and I'm really keen to get your feedback on what are some of the things that you've seen break down in your operation. What are some of the other KPIs that you track as a community? Again, as a community of field service excellence leaders, we want to create this, we want to crowdsource this playbook, right? As you can see, I'm really, grateful for Roy for sharing his knowledge with us. And I want to see more and more experts come into this community and share their playbook and their experience, so we can put it all together and have everyone benefit from it. So I'm really thankful for Roy for the enlightening conversation we had on field operation, because when it comes to it, field operation is the lifeblood of the business, and you wouldn't want to fumble it up. And before we wrap up, make sure to follow Roy on LinkedIn. Comment with your biggest takeaway. What are some of the operations breakdown that you face, and how do you typically go about resolving them? And as I said, I'm buying 5 copies of the Art of Leading book that will be coming out. I'll be covering all expenses, and on top of that, I'll be giving out some merch that is quite unique. If you know Roy's style, he's got some real awesome taste when it comes to, he's an artist. I know he's kind of sounds analytical and very mechanical in operation, but he's also got his artistic side, which is reflected in a lot of the merch he designs. So make sure to comment below with your biggest takeaway, and I'm going to pick 5 people that I'll send them Roy's book along with some merch. And with that said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode. Roy, appreciate you for your time here, brother.
Thank you. Appreciate it.